of biotech and digital health investing. So certainly 2020 has accelerated the adoption of digital health and really launched a wave of innovation in biotech. We are seeing a record-breaking levels of investment, and I am really looking forward to hearing what our speakers have to say and really what this will look like moving forward. So before we start, I would like to turn this over to my co-host, Carmen Sorelli, who is a partner at Frank Rimerman. So Carmen?
Thanks, Denise, and welcome everyone. We are very excited to be partnering with Silicon Valley Forum to produce the Women Who Invest Forum. As she mentioned, I'm Carmen Sorelli, a partner with Frank Rimerman. We're a certified public accounting and advisory firm. We're headquartered in Silicon Valley, and we're partnering with clients on driving the innovation economy. 2020 was a year of so much uncertainty and turmoil, but during this pandemic year, the biotech industry IPOs continue to pique interest. In fact, venture capital fundraising in healthcare reached record levels. The growth continues, and as we're only halfway through 2021, it is evident that there continues to be an increased interest in this segment. I refer to our time during this pandemic as a journey in uncharted territories. All of us were impacted professionally and personally. Among all of the chaos, one clear positive outcome observed is the acceleration of new innovations that already have and will continue to disrupt healthcare. The reach is broad and wide, and from enhancing cognitive performance to tissue engineering and bone regrowth. Our panel of female leaders are embracing this journey of disruption, and they're really doing their part. I'm excited to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Anula Jayasuriya. Anula is a leader in the field of viral pathogenesis. She served as the Vice President of Global Drug Development at Hoffman La Roche before becoming a partner with Skyline Ventures. She co-founded the first fund in India to focus exclusively on healthcare. Also, Anula founded Exclaim Capital, an early-stage venture fund focused on investing in women's health. And now I turn it over to you, Anula.
Thank you very much, Carmen, for that lovely introduction, and Denise and Eze for inviting me. And I'm delighted to be here with 4 women panelists who are at the top of their game in so many ways. First, we're very lucky to have them represent very different subsectors within the healthcare industry. And that's pretty rare to be able to get such a diversity of inputs in one panel. So I'm very excited about hearing their different views. As Carmen mentioned, we have Nina talking about very exciting ways to regrow bone. We have Susan, who is disrupting the way that physicians diagnose skin infections, skin conditions, including infections. And then Karen is disrupting sleep in a positive way by making us sleep better. Again, very interesting innovation. And then a completely different point of view, we have an investor, Wei Wu, with Johnson & Johnson JJDC, Johnson & Johnson Development Corporation, which is part of the investing arm of J&J. So again, we have this wide spectrum of perspectives, and I will do my best to elicit as many different perspectives as possible in this conversation. So I'm going to endeavor to take questions in the chat throughout the process. I don't know how well I can parallel process and multitask, but I will try. And I'm also going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and their work in a company or a fund for just a few minutes. And then we'll get into the meat of the discussion, discussing themes, differences between tech investing and life sciences and all those good things. So I'm going to start with Wei Wu as an investor at JJDC. Could you please tell us a little bit about how you look at the universe and also just a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'm happy to. First, thank you for the organizer for inviting me, and thank you, Anula, for the kind introduction. My name is Wei Wu. I'm currently the principal of Johnson & Johnson Innovation, JJDC. As Anula mentioned, this is the corporate venture group of J&J. So we can't talk about JJDC investment without mentioning the very wide and deep capability of Johnson & Johnson as the corporate. So we invest into the strategic areas of J&J, currently maybe about 60 to 70% in biopharma and 20% in medical device and the rest in consumer health. So we actually work under the Johnson & Johnson Innovation umbrella. So we collaborate with the other function within J&J in the ecosystem. For instance, J Labs, which people are very familiar with, is the incubator of J&J. And we also work with Innovation Center, which do the early partnering. We also collaborate with Janssen Business Development in the clinical stage and later stage partnering. And JJDC as the corporate venture, we are stage agnostic and our check size is variable. And last year we were ranked as the #1 healthcare corporate venture based on the PitchBook number of the publicly announced investments that we have done. So typically we work across the J&J network and we try to identify the companies that fit with our strategic areas. And we use a variety of toolkits to come up with a tailored solution to work with the company. And after the investment, we continue to introduce our network to be a value-added investor to help our portfolio company towards their exit and also onboarding with J&J. Yeah, I would love to talk more about the details, but I will leave more time to other panelists. Thank you.
Just to summarize, you are a strategic investor to contrast with financial investors who are looking primarily at the return on investment. Of course, you care about the return, but you're also looking at how various technologies might augment the technologies you already have at J&J, and also you cover a spectrum from therapeutics to medical devices and also digital health, which I think for this group is a very exciting area to cover.
Yeah, I think you are correct. And we are also a patient investor, long-term capital deployed to the company. So usually when we exit our position, that is because we have achieved certain inflection point or strategic milestone. And that usually financial return will come to us when the drugs or the solution benefit the patients and society. And we care about that.
And patience in investing is a big theme in healthcare investing. It usually takes a long time. So it's great to have investors like you who are patient. Quick question, how often do you acquire companies that you invest in?
Oh, that's a good question. I think last year, so onboarding our portfolio company is one of our mission and mandate. Last year, we had 4 of such onboarding events, including the large licensing and M&A. I would say we do acquire some of our portfolio company. The percentage probably is not disclosed to public.
Okay, fair enough. One other question, just for the audience. You talked about what the positives are, advantages of investing, having a strategic investor. Some companies may worry about the ability to exit to another company, a competitive pharma company, or may worry about their patents, various things. They might have some concerns about a strategic investor. Now, I know that those concerns are not real, but perhaps you could allay some fears.
Thank you for the question. This is another great question. So JJDC was founded in 1973. So we have been in this corporate venture business for almost half a decade. So we have our best practice in corporate venture that we maintain a firewall with the other operating company within J&J. So we don't share certain information in the investment data room, for instance, financial, some of the legal and commercial agreement that we do for our investment diligence. We don't share this information to the J&J OpCo. And when we serve on the board of the company, we also maintain our jury duty as the board member to serve the best interest of the company, but not J&J. So in the context when some strategic collaboration with other companies come up, we will step out of the room. Of course, if there are existing role for role fund, meaning the strategic rights that we signed in the collaboration agreement, we will mention in the boardroom. And then J&J has the right to execute a deal within the timeframe that we have agreed upon in the prior legal documents. But if J&J did not move on within that timeframe, we'll open up the opportunity to other strategic partners. And as a board member, our mission is loyalty is to the benefit of the startup portfolio company.
In other words, you have every bit of the confidentiality and security and so forth of a financial investor, and then you have the added benefit of your the heft of J&J.
Yes, that's why J&J gave us a dedicated team of finance, legal, IP, transaction people to just work on J&J deals, JJDC deal, not in the BD or other transaction team.
And I hope that you'll find a lot of interesting deals here represented in your fellow panelists here. So if I may now move to Karen, I believe that there are several very interesting aspects to your company, and I'd like you to tell everyone about them. But one of them is that you're fairly early on in this journey. Another is that we have learned how important sleep is. Women in menopause have lots of difficulty with sleep. People have difficulty with sleep regardless of where they're in their stage of life. But I want to call out menopause as one, and then Alzheimer's and predisposition to cognitive impairment is correlated with sleep. So you're in a very important area. And thirdly, you are in the vanguard of novel therapeutics or interventions in healthcare. So you have a wearable, which has a digital aspect to it. So it's digital health, a wearable, and your initial strategy is direct to consumer, although you are contemplating or are planning on a regulatory strategy. So if you could tell us all about this new space and also how you're looking at the future, that would be great. Actually, I'll come back to the future at the end, but how about you give us just a background, a little view into your world.
Okay, I'll start with the past. First of all, thanks for having me here. It's a great panel to be on, and I'm excited to share my perspective. My background is in traditional business, so management consulting, got involved in the .com era way back early and ended up joining a little startup called Google. And we're in the sales operations team there for North America, Latin America, and Asia Pac for the Fortune 1000 advertisers. I did that for many years, and then left there to start a nonprofit. And it's an online interactive tools for donor education. And then a couple of things happened for me personally that kind of resulted in the launch of Neurogenesis. My son had a sleep disorder. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so being the type A person that women tend to be, learned everything I could about sleep science and neurocognitive diseases, and found this really intriguing research that had been done, replicated in research clinics throughout the world, that showed that acoustic stimulation, audio stimulation, time to memory consolidation during sleep would improve your memory. But it happened to require that you sleep in a sleep clinic and have a pulsonogram equipment and have a technician administer it. So being in my position where I could see my mom's demise, trying to figure out, well, what can I do today to help my brain health, to extract the most value out of the little sleep I was getting. Thought that this would be an incredible technology to have in the consumer environment. So launched Neurogenesis so that we could develop this technology of acoustic stimulation during sleep to enhance memory. And so our focus is on memory enhancement and cognitive performance, but we make it easy, so we do it while you're sleeping. And we're currently in clinical trials now at University of New Mexico, and showing about a 25% increase in overnight memory retention. So we're really excited about that. So essentially what our device does, it's this little EEG headband you put on, then you go to sleep. It detects, does real-time sleep analytics. It detects when the memory consolidation process occurs. It's a very distinctive brainwave, and we spent about 2 years analyzing this one little brainwave. And so we then, once we detect it, we synchronize the audio sound to entrain it or amplify it and induce more. So it's essentially hitting Control S to save more data to your brain's hard drive. And so that's what we do more times during the night. And so again, we're in clinical trials, and the whole goal of this is to improve your memory, day to day, but also the long-term real objective is to slow cognitive decline as we age, and using the power of sleep. That we shortchange ourselves so often, but using that power, the innate power that sleep gives us to restore our memory and our brain health, and really capture that and empower that to the greater good.
Karen, I think people want to know what your wonderful device is called, and you might want to remind us of the company's name as well.
Yeah, so in fact, I will put it in the chat here as soon as I finish talking, but so that people can contact me if they want to geek out on this sleep science and everything else. So the company is called Neurogenesis, and we are pre-revenue. So again, we're in clinical trials now with our prototype. We are in the stage of development where we are largely self-funded. We only have one outside investor. It happens to be Esther Dyson, who is absolutely fantastic. But what we found when we were starting to launch and think about fundraising, we span this strange dichotomy between kind of life science investors and then consumer tech investors. And life science people looked at us and said, "You're going direct to consumer, that's a marketing game. That's, there's no science in that." And many of them got scared away. And then the consumer oriented investors, the minute we said the words FDA, they freaked out and said, "Well, that's too capital intensive. It's too risky. It's a 4-letter word. We're not going to touch you." And so we decided, well, let's just focus on proving the technology. Let's just double down and get our clinical trials going, and then we will come back. So we're in fact in the process of, by the end of summer, we're going to start launching a seed round at that point. So that's kind of where we are in our kind of fundraising and evolution of the company.
Well, I think there are going to be lots of investors who are going to want to invest in you when the clinical data are out. And to that point, there was a question about how the improvement in memory is being quantified.
Sure. In our clinical trials, again, the great thing for us is that the basic science of this has already been proven in top peer review journals like Cell, Neuron, Journal of Neuroscience. So there have been studies done, but again, they were all in sleep clinics. So we were able to model our study design on those protocols. And so the way it works is someone would wear the headband multiple nights. One night is just for calibration so we can calibrate the audio sound, and they get used to sleeping with it and taking a memory assessment test. We do the same memory assessment test as all the other studies, the standard associative word pair test. And so then they'll wear the headband for 4 nights. 2 of them have stimulation and 2 of them do not. It's a crossover, within subject crossover blind study. And so at the each night, they will take a memory assessment, and then in the morning, they're given 82 word pairs, dog, bone, tree, leaf. And at the end, they take the assessment, they do it again in the morning, or they're given 1 word and they have to recall the other pair. And what we do is we compare the nights that they had stimulation versus the nights that they did not have stimulation. So it's, they are their own control group. And so that's how we
with the
measure.
crossover design, right? Then they're their own
Right.
control group. Yeah, that's a very interesting design. And how does this? You talked about cognition, and we all care about cognition. How does this actually correlate also with sleep and sleep cycles and REM and the various other sleep cycles?
Yeah, so declarative memory consolidation occurs by and large in N3 sleep, or slow wave sleep. The sleep scientists were not very creative, so it's the stages of sleep are N1, N2, N3, N being non-REM, and then there's the 4th stage of REM. So N3 sleep is also known as deep sleep or slow wave sleep. And so declarative memory, and that's essentially when, during the day you get all this data, it's temporarily stored in the hippocampus. And at nighttime during slow wave sleep, these very specific communication between the hippocampus and neocortex occurs. And that's that memory consolidation brainwave called slow oscillations. And so during that time, hippocampus talks to the neocortex, transfers data over, and that's what happens. And so what we do again is look for that particular brainwave. We spent 2 years analyzing it, probably know as much about it as anyone on the planet, and synchronize the stimulus to that, and it induces it and it happens more times. So the channel between the hippocampus and neocortex stay open longer, more data gets transferred over.
And is that a durable effect then? In other words, does someone have to keep wearing the device? Or do we know whether they can take it off for 3 days and retain good memory?
Yeah, it's like we talked about a lot. It's like you only floss the teeth you want to save. You only wear the headband and stimulate the memories you want to save. So because the memories are temporarily stored every day, you need to get it over to the brain's hard drive. And once it's there, it's there. And so the more you wear it, the more data will be transferred over.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We'll come back to various other aspects of your business model. Susan, I'd love you to tell us about how you're helping physicians diagnose skin conditions. And I'd love you to talk about also, you raised money about a year ago, and like to hear your experience with investors, because my understanding is that you are combining, again, going with aspects of tech with healthcare. And it will be interesting to hear how that went from the investor perspective, and then also from the adoption from the physician perspective.
Of course. So just to give you a little bit of background, I'm trained as a mechanical engineer, worked in management things. So I came back to school to MIT to go deep in product development, and it looks like my internet connection is unstable. So my apologies.
I just missed a word, but it's okay.
And I've had melanoma 3 times, starting when I was 22, and so decided, to take the opportunity.
Oops.
Early identification and how technology can help. Really, is it just me that's challenged by or what's going on with this? And learned a ton, but especially interviewed patients like me who'd had skin issues, and primary care providers who are dealing with the vast majority of skin disease cases. Right, that's where you go if you have a problem. and dermatologists, and learned that dermatologists are like very confident at visually assessing skin issues, right? They walk in the room and instantly build like, I think it's this disease A, but it could also be B, C, and D. So I need to, ask a few questions to rule things in, rule things out. And primary care physicians encounter the most skin disease cases, but misdiagnose about 50%. Trying to make the best choice for that patient, what we found is, you can only refer out so many cases. And so they refer out the cases of high risk, suspicious for skin cancer, that sort of thing. But when it comes to most rashes, they generally try to treat that patient and see how they do. And if the patient doesn't respond, then refer out or do other things. So how our system works is you can take a couple of photos in the clinic, or you can have a patient take them remotely, right? We're in a pandemic. and our AI identifies that short list of what the dermatologist builds right when they walk in their room, and then helps that doctor know what questions to ask to figure out the right next step for each person.
And how did you develop this database? And I assume it's still growing. So how did you populate it originally? How did you get access to all of this? And then how have you deployed machine learning or AI, or what do we want to call it, to improve the algorithms to diagnose?
Yeah, of course. So AI, like, what is it? Data's the new oil. AI runs on data. And some people tend to think that this is a solved problem, right? There have been multiple publications around AI identifying skin cancer versus benign moles. But what we found is exactly what you said. There's, a lot of perfectly curated data online for suspicious moles, but in psoriasis or eczema or shingles, there just isn't that publicly available data set. And so what we've done is we've partnered with dermatologists in the US and internationally in over 10 countries in order to, right now we have a data set that's more than 450,000 photos, and working with these physicians that are in South Africa and India and Tunisia and Bolivia in order to make a robust AI that works across multiple different skin tones in order to address this breadth question of what rash is this. So it's been a lot of rolling up our sleeves and trying a lot of new methods. And I guess one of the important things that the differentiators of healthcare is that it's a more conservative industry that really depends a lot on building trust through being HIPAA compliant and all of these different ways that you can build that trust and build that relationship. And so we've built that relationship with those dermatologists in order to get that data and have a high accuracy AI.
It's great that you're from the get-go looking at different skin tones. That's been historically a big challenge. So, and is your product, is it primarily visual and diagnosing the presentation, or does it also take into account symptomatology and maybe some history, other kinds of aspects of it? Is it both?
Good question. So, right, like any medical problem, there's a lot of new, you go down the decision tree diagram and you discover a new section. And so what we've done is we've simplified it into 2 steps. The first step is taking a high quality image and identifying the most similar conditions. So that's visual AI. And then the next step is identifying what are those history questions. Like if it could be Lyme, then asking about where you've traveled, if you've been in New England or in a different area that has more exposure to that, have you gone hiking, that sort of question to help a doctor identify, is this really not a likely condition, it could be critical but very unlikely, versus I should really consider this and take action, do testing, do a referral, that sort of thing. And so we break it down into those 2 sections, but we do always ask a certain standard list of questions at the beginning, because it's always important to know what body part it's on, right? People don't get rosacea on the back. So important to know that.
Have you considered selling this directly to patients who want to have access to this and don't want to go to see their doctor? Is this something that is from a business model standpoint, and then also from a regulatory standpoint? How would that be feasible?
Certainly feasible. It's on our roadmap. I think some factors that are, important for us is we can do a lot of the processing, but we do like to leave that last percentage for that physician to interpret. But there's definitely like last mile decision making and information that we can build up as we go. But I mean, certainly from a patient's perspective, that's like the biggest pull from the market of like, I have a rash or my kid has a rash. I don't want to have to take a day off work in order to go to the pediatrician to be told it's chickenpox, and so we've definitely heard that strong interest, but just decided for a few different reasons. One, the frequency of the problem, like primary care physicians encounter skin in 1 out of every 4 visits. And so it's just a daily problem that we can help them solve versus once or twice a year, more of a common cadence with the average person.
One last question before I go on to Nina. What was your fundraising experience like? Did you attract conventional healthcare investors? Were they tech investors? Did you feel like you fell through the cracks between the two? Or did you feel like there was a beautiful convergence between the two?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a systems engineer, and so I always learned that problems happen at the intersections of things, but also that I think the opportunities for real change are at the intersections of things. So maybe it makes it a little bit harder to raise finding the right perfect fit investor group, but then you can, make an outsized impact, but that's opinion. So I think in our fundraise, right, we closed our round at the end of last June. And so we got our term sheet from our lead investor in like March, which was a rough year or a rough month for many. And so I think it was a bit bumpy because I had previously identified who were the investors who've already invested in healthcare and AI, who are, the most likely to understand what we're doing, understand the importance of data, that sort of thing. And I think half of the people in that list just froze. They were still sometimes taking meetings, which I did not appreciate, but they were really focused on making sure their own previous investment were okay, that they had enough capital to last through this thing. And so, but then our lead investor was like, in economic downturns, that's where Uber was created. That's where all these huge companies have been made. And so they've been operators and founders through a few different downturns. So had a very different perspective on it. And I guess I really appreciated that, that perspective at the time. And then we brought on individual investors who know our space, like Esther Dyson's also on our cap table. And
a shout out to Esther Dyson, 2 out of 4 companies.
She's amazing. And then we had a traditionally Series A health tech investor invest in us at the seed rate, which was only their like second early stage investment. And they've really been helpful for bringing like strategic context and being able to talk about sales cycles and that sort of thing, make connections in the healthcare industry for us. But then also the tech folks bring a ton to the table because they know early stage, they know crawl, walk, run principles of how do you get this thing off the ground with limited resources. And so we've just been fortunate to bring in the best of both.
And I'm going to read this out from Esther to everyone. Karen and Susan are amazing, and Nina too. So thank you, Esther. You were pretty early in seeing this so-called synergy that lots of people saw as a chasm. And you made several very forward-looking and successful investments. And we need this infusion from tech into healthcare investing and the ability to see the future, which is not going to look like the past. So with that, Nina, tell us about Epibone. You have your first patient who has your product, totally different from anything we've had in the past. Please tell us about your company.
Yeah, well, it's great to see other engineers on the panel. I am an electrical engineer by training, so I'm trained to build machines. And I love that biotech really is all about, in a way, building machines which natural biological processes can connect to. I started out in software engineering and, applied to go into, I started taking community college classes, frankly, while I was working as a software engineer. And really got interested in the intersection of biology and the type of technology that we build with our hands. And so I applied to MIT, landed in the lab of Bob Langer, and started studying tissue engineering, which is really all about how to get cells to grow tissues. And
just for people who don't know Bob Langer, he's one of the most prolific professors cum entrepreneurs. And has started a zillion companies, and many of them very successful. Sorry, I just needed to give some context.
Thank you. Sorry for that. His lab has spun out more companies than any other lab in the world. I was really surrounded by a pretty active hive of entrepreneurship and scientific activity. And I was really interested in studying the electrical signals that are resident in the human body during embryonic development, wound healing, and and then I went to work as a management consultant like Karen. So I thought that was really cool, and while I was doing that, it was around the same time that a lot of pharma companies were kind of pulling back from their own internal R&D. There was a lot of talk about the patent cliff, and it became really clear that academic spin-outs were really becoming the new hotbed of innovation, and I knew I wanted to be part of it. So I made a U-turn back to academia for a postdoc with my direct PI, a woman named Gordana Bunyak-Novakovic, another prolific inventor in her own right, and helped write the business plan for what eventually became Epibone. So I've been working on this technology in some way, shape, or form for close to 20 years, and it really is my life's work. And at Epibone, what we're doing is essentially trying to create a kind of one-stop body shop for the human body. A lot of times we started out, each of us as humans, as one cell big. And somehow that cell divided again, and those cells differentiated and became all of the tissues that, comprise our physical bodies, and yet somehow when we get injured, or if we have congenital defects, or in some cases, cancer, it overwhelms our body's natural capacity to regenerate those lost tissues. But those cells know how to grow tissues anyway. And so what we do at Epibone is we create, our IP is really what we call bioreactors. These are advanced cell culture systems that mimic the condition of the human body. They provide, it's essentially a fluid handling system that also applies, exercise to the tissue. So in a way, it's like the diet and exercise that get the cells to differentiate into different tissue types. And what we're doing at Epibone is we're starting with bone. We're growing bones for the head and face. We've just started our first human clinical trial. Our first patient was implanted less than 1 month ago. So we are on pins and needles as we are making this transition. We're so excited. And we've now also started growing cartilage. So we are in animal studies there. So it's a really fun journey so far. And, we're at a real inflection point in our journey. I couldn't help but hear you kind of allude to this almost uncanny valley that each of the other entrepreneurs have found themselves in. And I would say the kind of tension that we have felt in our fundraising journey has been between the traditional device investors who understand three-dimensional therapies and understand our end markets, and the cell therapy industry that understands cells, and they are mostly focused on cancer. So it's been a real educational there's been a real educational component for us working with investors and trying to find our perfect home, so to speak.
You brought up several really important points. I do want to go back to what you're actually doing, because you have the xenogenic scaffold, and then you're taking autologous cells, if I understand correctly, and putting them on. So I do want to get a chance to talk about
Okay,
that.
I can talk us
That's
through
really
the process.
cool.
Sure.
But I want to talk about the big picture that you also brought up, which is how at least in healthcare, and I don't know anything about tech, so I shouldn't be saying anything about it, but in healthcare, there are very different types of investors. There are the medical device investors, there are the diagnostics investors, there is the absolute sort of acme of the therapeutics drugs investors, and among them, the greatest sort of interest today is in oncology. And that kind of dwarfs oncology, cell therapy, gene therapy, and rare diseases, kind of dwarfs all the other sectors put together. And Wei Wu, you know about this area very well. And then, so just like everything else, the point I'm trying to make is healthcare investing, is very diverse depending on which part of healthcare investing you're in. You could also be in healthcare services. We don't have anybody representing services alone, or electronic health records. Those are all very different areas, but we're very lucky to have this very diverse panel, actually, talking about all the different areas. But then the interesting part is, so you have all these people, and then came all these digital health apps and AI, machine learning, and kind of created this would-be glue between all these different areas. But the investors are just catching up because they like to stick to the areas they know, usually regulatory pathways. I think it's very much driven by regulatory pathways and reimbursement pathways. And they specialize they say they specialize in therapeutic areas, but it's actually the regulatory and reimbursement that's the bedrock of their understanding.
Right.
And this is, and I'm very old, so I want to go back to the 70s, 80s, when the same investors did healthcare and tech.
Right.
And then they cleaved off from each other in the 90s, because there were some big differences between healthcare and life sciences. For example, healthcare took a much longer time to exit in general. Upfront investments were much greater, and the risk was seen as much greater before you know whether you had something viable or not, right? And with it used to be that with mainframe computers, they both had the same kind of upfront investment and risk. But then technology went off to really lower the upfront investment. It took off in a very different way. And now I'm hoping that we are going to get this all coming back together as each group brings their expertise, rather than saying, okay, we don't know about this other area, which I also tend to do, and say, I don't know about this. I'm going to stick to what I know. But really that's not helpful and not in sync with where the world is going, as evidenced by people like you and where you are taking it. So you're going to drag us lagging investors to get with it and look at the new world. And so we are so fortunate to have all of you as panelists, because this is really, you are at the forefront of what's good for patients and what needs to be invested in. So
I mean, I hope so. I mean, it's I love this work so much. I'm a lifer at this point doing it. And I think it's what to me feels so satisfying is the kind of almost subversive nature of the work, because we're really saying that
that's a great word.
Our bodies are the source of our own healing. Our bodies provide the active ingredient. And that's just something that I think is so exciting, that if we can kind of come full circle, and I think there's something we have in common with Karen's work here, working with the natural biorhythms of the body and figuring out how to amplify that using the technologies we build with our hands. I think we're really at a tipping point in terms of curative care as opposed to chronic treatment. And it feels so subversive to be looking at the body as its own, active ingredient in some of these high tech applications we're finding ourselves in. I think that's part of what's so satisfying about it for me. It's like there's this kind of aspect of, Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz saying there's no place like home. It's I hope that through this work I've really developed such a love for the natural biology and that we all call home.
And you're changing how physicians, I'm a physician by training, look at, we in the US in particular, we did sick care, right? We didn't, and then the reimbursement system reinforced that because we didn't get reimbursed for prevention. Right. And so, we know these problems, but
don't get me started about that.
Yeah. But you're changing this whole equation.
Yeah, I think
and empowering patients to do either heal their own bodies, or in Susan's case, let them actually have a say in, in their diagnosis, as are you. You don't have to go to a sleep clinic. So that this is really very exciting times in healthcare, really, really very rapidly evolving. And so a couple of things I have to get in before we end, and it's looking like this is going pretty fast. I would like to ask Wei to talk a little bit about therapeutics. I know that she knows a lot about cell therapy in cancer, and has been looking at some of at therapeutics. Could you talk to us a little bit about, as an investor, what you're looking at in the cancer space, which is the biggest drug development space? That's where most of the clinical trials, most of the money goes, and most of the exits are for companies. Could you talk about what you think are the big headlines in cancer?
Sure. So actually for JJDC, we invest in various therapeutic areas in addition to cancer. Of course, oncology is one of the largest therapeutic area, as you mentioned. So for oncology, there are a couple of areas that are interesting to us at the moment. Of course, there are more and more attention to the precision oncology, which means we can stratify patients better, understand their response to drug better, and identify the specific treatment to achieve the best outcome for this patient. And this could include, for instance, some of the specific cancer target that we are researching on, and then develop drug against those. And sometimes it could be synthetic lethality. Basically, you identify maybe another mechanism or target that can interact with the target that you want to intervene with. And also we have immune oncology, and this has been a hot area in the past few years. And under that, we also have deeper understanding about the different type of regulatory T cells, other immune cells, and how to utilize our understanding of the mechanism to develop therapeutics, both in combo and in single agent therapeutics. And under that, of course, a lot of cell therapy probably have some immuno-oncology mechanism in it. And we all know that J&J had cell therapy product that has generated very favorable clinical data, and we look forward to adding more in the pipeline, or to find some opportunity that is synergistic, complementary to that. And manufacturing is usually a hurdle for cell therapy, so some of the platform technology that will help would also be very interesting. And for J&J, we also have a lot of different other modality, including bispecifics and how to target different tumor type, both
different type of antibodies, or bispecifics are the antibodies, right?
Yeah, exactly. And also for both solid and liquid tumor. And we are very strong in prostate cancer, and we have the cross-sector initiative in lung cancer. And we are also expanding into, and also very strong capability in heme malignancy, and we are expanding to additional cancer types.
And I want to ask you one other question. Interestingly, J&J has Dr. Susan Nicholson heads the Women's Health Initiative within J&J. And this is, I am now shamelessly usurping the podium to talk about my favorite topic, which is differences between men and women, both in terms of their biology and genetics, as well as also the social environment that women live in. And I think it's been relatively recent that the medical establishment and also society has been talking about the differences between men and women. And it is I think a health imperative, and not a political one, but a health imperative, that we have women like you starting companies and also female investors like you, Wei, because the venture capital is sort of the fuel for innovation, and then and the way that women see the world and see problems and identify with problems is going to be different. This should be no surprise, but really the number of women in venture capital is very, very low. The number of entrepreneurs who are women is growing up, is increasing wonderfully, still not enough, but increasing. But venture capital is still lagging. And this, I think, is a big problem. And for those women in the audience who are looking at investing in healthcare, please do so, because we need the perspective of people who are experts, but also people who are from outside of the healthcare world. And we need many more women, not just for social justice, but for delivering the best possible healthcare for patients, because there are substantial differences. And the conversation is just starting. And it's in your capable hands, all of you, to take that forward. Okay, now that I've done my own plug, I'm going to move to something more topical. And Carmen, I'd love you to talk about the effect of COVID on the healthcare industry. You described an experience you had through Frank Rimerman, and I'd like you to tell that to everybody else. And then I'd like to ask each of you to talk a little bit about, very quickly, about how COVID has impacted your business. Carmen.
Thank you. I actually had the honor of working for a company who was doing, they started out doing the genetic testing. And as soon as COVID hit, they had the infrastructure, the back end, or the process to be able to kind of jump on and be of help on distributing COVID tests. And, and they reinvented themselves. So when we started, they had a revenue of about, $9 to $10 million. And after 12 months, they're now at about $175 million. It was chaos, I'll be honest with you. So I think as a finance person, just kind of guiding some entrepreneurs, really observe the infrastructure, and when do you kind of invest in that automation, and sort of, how do we kind of get that quote to cash, right? We're quoting, and then we want to collect that cash and everything in between, and delivering the obligation. And then when do you make that investment? And that's really an important thing as a CEO to keep an eye on, because you miss opportunities, you leave money on the table. And sometimes as you're going through that growth, the chaos is so crazy, you're missing opportunities. And I think a lot of the startups that I've worked with have reinvented themselves as they're developing their product. They're seeing opportunities, and they're staying focused, but they're reinventing themselves. And the growth has been exponential, in particular in this area. I work for another company. I have another client who's a medical device company, they started with government funding. So that's another opportunity. There's a lot of money right now if you know how to write SBIRs, small business proposals. There's a lot of money that is being put into this area. And as a female CEO, you have the additional opportunity because they look for women, they look for great ideas. So tap into that money because it doesn't dilute your ownership. And there really is a collaborative effort. And so that's been my experience with the medical device companies and the COVID company that I worked with.
Thank you, Carmen, and thank you for sponsoring this event. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm so honored to be here with all of you. Honestly, it's amazing.
Thank you. So COVID has been by and large a boon to healthcare. There are also, in terms of financial returns, as Susan talked about, in the first few months of COVID, all of us investors not all, but some of us said, okay, well, we want to see where this is going. But then we saw certain segments just take off, like digital health, telemedicine. Obviously, many companies pivoted and became COVID diagnostic companies, did very well. So it ended up being actually net positive, even though for the patients, for some companies, clinical trials were slowed down and patients couldn't get as much care as they needed. And then there were obviously very disparate effects. It showed most of the warts in the US healthcare system were spotlit by COVID, and then lack of access to different populations. So the impact of COVID has been, if you look at it financially, the healthcare markets are booming, and there's more money for companies' investment than ever before. However, there have also been some very ugly things about our healthcare system that have come to surface. But let's talk about the positive. Or not the positive, just let's talk about each of your experiences. It could be negative. Susan, what has your experience been?
A mix. I'd say we had a data strategy partnering with US-based hospitals. And then the pandemic hit, and innovation teams that previously had the luxury to think 5 or 10 years out were thinking, how do I get enough PPE by tomorrow? So there was just a lot of reallocation of resources, which made 100% of sense, but kind of rained on our parade a little. And so we had to change, and now we've had a much bigger international push. And so we and everyone's been at their computers without anything else to do for 16 months. And so that actually worked out as a really great avenue for us. But we just, international always seems so unknown, and every country is different. So we'd previously not gone that road. But then I think now, thinking back on what we were pitching before the pandemic hit, now we have opportunities to sell into the telemedicine market, which has hugely developed in amazing ways that could potentially support a company like us who's very specific on dermatology. And so I'm excited about that. And just all of our telemedicine colleagues have been through a lot in the last 20 years, trying to say, hey, we should pay doctors the same amount to do remote care versus in person. And it's just been a really uphill battle for them. And so finally they had their day in the sun, or day in the shade, maybe I should say, day with sunblock, SPF 45. And then otherwise, yeah, I think you're right. There's been a lot more attention into is our health system actually helping the people it's intended to help, or what's going on there, and are there issues with access and that sort of thing. And so I think with Black Lives Matter and a really big push toward diversity and making sure data is representative I think that's been supportive of us, but we do have to roll up our sleeves and get creative, because they're, the darkest skin tone communities have way less access to amazing dermatology care, that sort of thing. So I don't know. I guess that's a super long answer to say it's a mixed bag, but overall probably net helped us.
Great, thank you. That's important. And Nina?
Yeah, well, we had just closed a round of funding in January, right before the pandemic hit, and I was really grateful for that. We were able to secure essential business status right away and keep the lab open and just keep a sober head on our shoulders as we tried to figure out how COVID was going to affect us. It affected us in two main ways. We'd just gotten a green light from the FDA for a human clinical trial, which was put on ice because elective surgeries were being paused and IRBs were being deprioritized if they were not involving COVID.
Maybe you want to mention what an IRB is.
IRB, for those who don't know, are the institutional review boards at hospitals that basically allow you to perform a clinical trial there. So we were basically on hold. And it took us, we weathered about a year-long delay. We had to move our animal studies. We moved them in state. Luckily, we're in New York State, so Cornell is a great place to work. And we just really doubled down on all of the R&D that we could do in the lab. And I am really proud to say that we have now implanted our first patient. Our second patient is being implanted later this summer. So we are finally off to the races. And this has been such an inflection point for us that now what we're witnessing is really that crest of folks who are really interested in the space. I mean, COVID has had many effects on many people, but for our industry in particular, I think just the enchantment that the world has seen with the power of biotechnology has been something, that kind of high tide is lifting all boats. And so, now we're at the point where we were planning a $25 million raise. Now everyone's saying we should expand it at least double. And so it's, we're finding that, having gotten through that difficult time, we're now coming on the other side of it. And it seems like there's a lot of interest in our field. I think, Susan was saying this earlier, data is like the new oil. If this after the end of World War II, I think that's when we saw the advent of nuclear technologies. If this is like a world war, in many ways it has some parallels. I think that biotechnology is really poised to be the post-war technology that everyone's going to be focused on. So this is my life's work. I'd do this whether it was in trend or not, but I am heartened to see that people are really witnessing firsthand the power of a lot of work that has taken many decades for people to perform.
And the importance of healthcare, I think, has really been underscored. I think people deprioritized healthcare in this country and to a certain extent, and the cost of that became clear, I think, in many ways. Karen, what was your experience?
A little of both. We benefited. The fact that labs were shut down and we're an at-home device actually helped us. But I think that we benefited from it accelerated consumer trends that had been starting. The idea that remote monitoring and management of patients and doing things at home, that whole concept, helps people think more about empowering themselves to take control of their own healthcare and being more proactive. And so I think that really heightened it, and the whole focus on mental health, and it really gets you to the brain health at the end of the day. And so whether it's sleep or, resilience and anxiety and stress that people are under, there's a little bit more awareness and concern and both from investors as well as just general consumer awareness that this is something we have to invest in. So we're lucky that we're in that kind of broadly defined space. And so it's given us a little bit more opportunity.
Great. And Wei, what is your experience with, and I'm not asking you to speak for all of J&J, perhaps just for some of your portfolio companies.
Yeah, I think like Susan said, at the beginning, maybe there was a fear that a lot of these companies probably will be shut down. But as the time goes by, and we quickly realize actually that's not happening. So actually, a lot of the startup company, they really thrive on during this environment and situation. So we really have the greatest admiration on the entrepreneurs and these startup companies. And what we have observed during the pandemic is that the financial capital market stays strong and healthy, and the interest in biotech or more traditional therapeutics also expand to the interest in the diagnostics, tools, medical device, and even some of the interdisciplinary health tech area. So this bring out to actually a more generally healthy biotech investing environment. Of course, we also see, some of the early rounds become larger and larger, and companies go IPO or exit sometimes earlier than what they would have been a couple of years ago. And everyone knows that SPAC becomes one of the popular exit routes for biotech companies. So these are some of the news situation that actually, or byproduct of the COVID environment. And there are quite a number of COVID-related companies that were formed during COVID. So whether these are sustainable, we are still observing. But so far, I think generally biotech companies are doing well, and more investors from other space come to biotech space to participate.
Right. There was a lot of pivoting going on from many diagnostic companies that were in other spaces decided to do COVID diagnostics, but turned out well. Many cancer companies decided to look at the immunotherapy. Cancer immunotherapy companies started looking at COVID treatment and so forth. But and the markets, the healthcare investing markets, have been very active and dynamic, more IPOs than ever, SPACs. At the same time, we had lots of people unable to access care and dying of COVID. So it's been a very uneven situation, I think, at a societal level versus in the healthcare markets. And that is something to contemplate. It would be nice if there was more cognitive harmony than dissonance in these two areas. But on that note, which I could make more uplifting by saying that it is, in fact, a biotech boom currently. Not everybody is going to benefit from it, but many are benefiting from it. Companies, investors, and I hope society, and I think society more than anything else, because that's really what matters most. And so it is a great time to be in healthcare, either as an investor or as an entrepreneur, or whatever role you choose to have in the industry. And I hope that we've given you a taste for how exciting and important and impactful and fun healthcare can be. So with that, I'll turn it over to Denise, and thank you all you wonderful participants. Thank you for all the questions in the chat and for your engagement. And we hope it's been as much fun for you as it has been for us.
Thank you so much, Anula, for leading such an amazing conversation. To all our panelists, I mean, wow, you guys are doing such incredible work, and I just want to thank you for that. And I will definitely be following up with a couple of you. And thank you for sharing your time with us today. And yes, Anula, we do need more women investing in healthcare. Thank you to all of our participants who joined us today, and to our wonderful partners at Frank Rimerman. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Carmen.
Thank you, Denise. And I echo the gratitude to the panelists. Thank you for sharing your passions and your contributions, and really kind of having that sort of dream of changing the world. Yeah, and you know, it's interesting at Karen's story. It's, you know, that motivation because of her son, and Nina, just kind of her passion it was just so infectious. So I really want to sort of share that this was really powerful in so many ways. And you know, I would like to leave you with a thought that I think leveraging these innovative technologies will essentially allow consumers or humans to just own their own healing. Nina mentioned how, you know, we have the power to heal ourselves, and with a little bit of, you know, sort of these technologies that kind of can guide us, will give us insight into areas that I just think that, you know, we are all new, and will drive sort of, I think, innovation and people kind of owning their health. And, you know, these investments in these unique healthcare startups will benefit us, all of us, like mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, grandchildren, friends, at some time in our lives. And I think it becomes important for us to kind of have that independence. And as much as we depend on the health system, I think there's more we're going to need to depend more on ourselves to kind of find that health. And I say this from personal experience. I've been diagnosed with cancer twice, so like I'm feeling it. And so it's really critical to empower consumers and to continue to invest in areas to make this a healthier and safer place for all of us. So I am super grateful to all of you for sharing.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you
Have a
so
good
much.
rest of your day. Thank you.